how lovely it is to be able to have a book launch. But I must say, lovely needs also to be said. It would have been lovelier if we could have really met, if it could have been an offline, physical, at a cafe, at a hall, a real book launch. Interesting, when I had my previous book launch, my earlier book, that was August 2020. And when I began speaking, I said, this is my first online book launch, and I do hope it is also the last. But what a pity, my dear friends. It was not the last. And here we meet again today with another book launch. I would like to begin with a silent prayer, each one of us, for the COVID victims, for the COVID survivors, for the COVID warriors, and a big prayer, silent prayer to God. I'm a firm believer in God, and I hope and pray that this too shall pass. So just a silent prayer, each one of us within our own hearts, before we continue with our online book launch. The book, of course, as you all know, is Amitav Ghosh, the writer with a difference. Some of you may pause to ask, why Amitav Ghosh? And my answer would be, why not Amitav Ghosh? I think he is one of the most promising. No, he's done much more than just be a writer of promise. With more than 14 works of fiction and as many works of non-fiction, Amitav Ghosh is read not only in India, but in many other parts of the world. His interests are varied. His research is deep. His style is fantastic. And so, about a year ago, a friend and me, we thought about why not a book on Ghosh. And so, sometime in April 2020, my dear friends, a year ago, began the process. But I must say that it's not very easy to put a book together, and certainly not in these times of new normal, as we love to call it. Well, I wrote to people, to known, to unknown, to various groups. The papers started coming in as early as April last year, 2020. Putting the papers together, looking at them, reviewing them, writing back to the writers, asking for changes, because we wanted it to be, in a way, done very proper. What do I mean by that? With the appropriate documentation, according to the MLA style sheet. We wanted an abstract, we wanted keywords, etc. We also thought, my dear friends, as those of you who have seen the book or will be seeing the book, that a lot has been done about Ghosh's earlier works. So in a way, we thought it would be good to focus on his later works, maybe beginning with the trilogies, the 2 trilogies that he wrote. And of course, also having papers on his non-fiction work, which is quite popular today because he's talking of issues which really have begun to worry us, especially in these days when we are wondering what joke nature is playing on us. The terrible virus that has brought almost the entire world to his knees. So it's interesting to look at Ghosh's non-fiction writing also. So began the process, and yes, the book was ready with a year, almost a year. I must thank my publisher, Tara Chanchi of Creative Publishers, who has been a constant source of support in publishing my books. And my dear friends, I must say, he's one of those rare publishers who doesn't ask for money, who is willing to give a free copy to each contributor. Contributors, you probably got your copies. Those of you who have not, It could be the lockdown in different parts of our country. Those of you who live abroad, it will take a little more time because the postal service, the courier service is not very, very organized as yet from India to some parts of the world. So you may have to wait. All right. But as I was putting this book together, I must mention the great help, assistance I got from one of my younger colleagues, Medha Sharma. She did a lot of work in editing, in proofreading, in reaching out to the contributors. I must place on record my sense of gratitude to Medha Sharma. Okay, the contributors, of course, without you this book would not have been possible. Let me then come to today's program. How did it all come about? I have two of my younger colleagues. Anyone I refer to will always be younger. I don't have to tell you how old I am. You probably can guess. So my colleagues are all younger colleagues. So I have two younger colleagues and Medha Sharma and me. Four of us, we decided to put this evening together. The two younger colleagues that I'm talking about, Dr. Shubha Nigam from LD Arts College and Dr. Monali Chatterjee from the Nirma Educational Hub. You know, they have ever so many colleges and she has a lot of experience in teaching various branches, various departments. Her interests, of course, are communication, language and literature. Dr. Shubha Nigam, in addition to being a teacher of English language and literature for many years, is also a theatre personality. She acts, directs, and even writes quite a bit for the theatre. So these two and my young colleague Medha Sharma, we put together this evening. What we really plan to do is that the four of us will be talking to you. But before we do that, we have with us a very, very learned scholar, Dr. Amitav, who will be giving us a bird's eye view of Amitav Ghosh's writings. I do not know how a bird's eye view is possible of such a great writer. But well, when you hear Namita Parimal, you'll see how she can condense the writings of such a great writer into the time allotted to her. And then we will have, as I mentioned, Dr. Shubha Nigam, Dr. Monali Chatterjee and Medha Sharma talking about their papers and also inviting some of the contributors who would have put their questions, I hope by then, on our chat box. And those questions will be answered by some of us. You could address your questions directly to any one of us, or you could make it a general question. The choice is yours. We hope that this is just a beginning of our journey together, and maybe there will be many more occasions for us to interact online and hopefully in the near future offline. The publisher has promised that he or one of his representatives, which is his daughter Neha, will probably be joining us to tell us something about what publishing in India is today. The difficulties maybe that publishers have to face. So my dear friends, can I once again thank all of you for joining us today in this online book launch venture of ours. All the best. Please stay with us for the next 1 hour and enjoy yourself. Of course, I will be seeing you, talking to you again, but this is just the beginning. I can only stay safe, stay healthy, stay blessed, follow all the COVID protocols so that we can say bye. I want to say get lost, but I'm scared to say that to a virus which is so dangerous. But can we say please leave us so that we can continue with our lives and get back to normal. Thank you friends once again and enjoy the event.
and one of them was the slave Boma. However, during his stay in Egypt, he makes quite a few friends, but Ghosh is also the subject of much ridicule due to his being an Indian and because of his Hinduism in particular. The Egyptians do not look upon Amitav as a fellow traveler in a third world suppressed colonized area. Instead, they mock his ways because Ghosh does not conform to their beliefs. This is in contrast to the relationship that existed between master and the slave bomber in the ancient world. There were better ties and there was better bonhomie between the Jews and the Muslims than there is in the modern world. Ghosh is also witness to the prosperity that changes these villages thanks to the contemporary political development in the Gulf and also the turmoil experienced by these inhabitants as a result of the war in Iraq. Ghosh once again touches upon the stories of the displaced and migrants that he had dealt with in his first two novels and would form the basis of successive novels. While the Egyptian families back home do bask in newly discovered luxuries, the comforts and prosperity has been procured at the cost of the sacrifice of the younger generation fighting on the frontiers of ambition. The Glass Palace, and though I must say my second favorite, was published in 2000 and it was the writer's fifth book. It is a historical novel spread across Burma, Bengal, Ratnagiri in India to Malaysia and Singapore. The novel that begins with the story of a little boy, Rajkumar, covers a span of 115 years. It unravels the political misfortunes of not only the royal family of Burma, but the personal tragedies and victories of Rajkumar Raha's family as well. When King Thibaw is exiled to India, Queen Supayalat retains some of her maids to take care of the princesses. One of these is Dolly, and often handpicked by the queen herself to be a part of her retinue. Meanwhile, the glass palace of the royals is being plundered and looted, and midst the confusion, Rajkumar, a young Indian boy, happens to meet the doll like Dolly, and then and there he vows that one day he is going to marry her. But I'll not go very deep into this novel because my learned friend Shubha is going to talk about it, so I won't waste time here. The Hungry Tide, the sixth novel by Ghosh, set in one of the most beautiful and comparatively unexplored parts of India, the Sundarbans. And of course, Bengal is very much in our minds today. The novel is a contemporary story of Kali Roy, Kanai Dutt, and the local native Fakir. The setting is beautiful but precarious. Life for the locals in these regions is not simple and easy. Tigers, tides, the crocodile infested waters, and storms are a constant threat. Yet, beauty and innocence also reside here. The Hungry Tide is a story of not only the characters that inhabit the Sundarbans, but of the land itself. Ghosh dwells on its myths, namely the story of the origin of the Ganges, Dokhin Rai, Bon Bibi, all of whom seem to rule over the lives of these simple and innocent human beings. In the novel, the author does not spare the government machinery, either past nor present. Historically, the government had tried to cover up the Morijhapi massacre, which Ghosh brings out brilliantly. Maybe we would not have learned about it, this generation, if Ghosh had not written about it. Similarly, he also talks about the contemporary government, the the people in the garb of forest officials who seem to exploit the local inhabitants. Geographically, the book is glued to the Sundarbans, but the story travels in time to the age of mythology, the historical past and present. It shuttles between Nirmal's utopia and Nilima's practical trust, and finally comes to rest with the promise of a future in the form of Tutul and Pia, who we will meet again in the Gun Island, signifying the transition from the present to the future. It is more than just a novel of adventure. It is history, mythology, and ecology rolled in one. But more than anything, it is a story of survival. Those who live here accept the very challenge of existence itself. And now I come to the favorite. In 2008, Ghosh embarked on his most ambitious project till date with the publication of The Sea of Poppies. He gave the world the first of the Ibis trilogy. The novel tells us about the colonial India on the eve of the Opium Wars. It goes deep into the villages of Bihar, which not only provided raw material for the flourishing opium factories, but also contributed to the large population of indentured migrants, the Girmityas, who replaced the slaves in the colonies after the abolition of slavery. And I'd just like to briefly mention here that we may not have heard of the Girmityas and their personal stories if Ghosh had not written this novel. History and fiction have never been better wedded than in this novel. He brings to the fore the outcomes of the British rule in India in general and the cultivation of poppies over staple crops in particular. He speaks about the experiences of indentured laborers. Most importantly, he serves us the details of the Opium Wars right from the background that caused them to the actual battles that led to the victory of the British thanks to the superior steamships. Through the Ibis novels, we finally see the plight of the Indian soldiers and Indian traders, both from the Indian and the Chinese points of view. In his next offering, The River of Smoke, the second book in the Ibis trilogy, Ghosh begins a little ahead of where he had left his Ibis passengers to show us Diti as the matriarch of a large brood of the Kolver family, set in Canton in general and Fan Kui in particular. River of Smoke revolves mainly around the Parsi trader Barham, who is investing in opium, but not only his fortune, his personal life is also at stake. He began with the background of the poppy plant and the manufacturing of opium in Flood of Fire, the third of the Ibis trilogy. He reveals to the readers the intricacies of the actual buying and selling of opium. Set on the eve of the First Opium War, it reveals to us the plight of the Indian soldiers. The readers are granted a peep into the minds of the soldier who never quite understood where his loyalty lay to country or the British crown. It is a book that explores the military exploits and also the exploitation of the Indian soldiers. It delves deep into military systems that were perhaps unexplored by writers till now. As, for example, the using of illegitimate children that were begotten by Indian women. These kids, these children were used in the military bands, and these bands would be at the front of the battle line and were usually the first to be shot. The Ibis trilogy deserves credit for showcasing Asia and the nuances that went into the formation of the colonial empire. The novels are written from the point of view of anthropology, history, and marginalization of the subaltern. In his non-fiction work, The Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable, Ghosh attempted to tackle the problem of climate change that has continued, and he has continued this subject with his latest offering, Gun Island. He therefore handles the same issue from the literary perspective of environment fiction. Though Ghosh acknowledges that when it comes to the issues of climate change, the novel in its present form has its restrictions because it has to take into consideration the narrow limitations of time, place, and space that may not extend beyond the lifespan of the characters. Yet he does feel that an elevated imaginary response is certainly the need of the hour to awaken the world to the perils of global warming and climatic crises. It seems that Gun Island was written with the intention of challenging the very limitations of such kind of fiction that he knew he would face, yet driven out of necessity to jolt the world back to reality, to realize the need to acknowledge that the enemy is knocking at our very doorsteps. Or should I say that the enemy has already entered our homes during this pandemic. To conclude, the novel form has given Ghosh a canvas to write about those who did not have a voice. His greatest accomplishment, perhaps, has been that he has brought the story of the Orient before the West. Till now, Asian history had been as virgin as the Sundarbans. Ghosh himself says of his writing, and I quote, I think of myself as an Indian writer in the first instance. By this I mean that my work has its roots in the experience of the people of the Indian subcontinent at home and abroad. I think I would be uncomfortable with any categorization of my work that did not acknowledge this. Unquote. The novel form enables him to paint as many characters as he wishes. And very briefly, I'll just wrap up by mentioning his characters. Of course, I cannot mention all of them. Beginning with the actual to the fictitious. But even in the fictitious ones, they have been created with a purpose, for they represent a class of citizens whose stories of exploitation have not been told. Kusum stands for the victims of the Mori Jhapi massacre. Dolly makes us wonder about the suffering of royalty, but also those who bore the double brunt by suffering at the hands of the royals first and the colonizers later. Arjun, Kesari Singh are the soldiers who did not win any medals on the battlefield, but their sacrifices emboldened that mammoth machine known as the British Empire. Credit goes to Ghosh that he brings before us each character that are as real as Aung San Suu Kyi and as real as Kusum, as real as Dolly, as real as Kesari Singh, and I would say, again, my favorite, as real as all the characters in the Sea of Poppies, Diti in particular. Thank you so much, Indira ma'am, for giving us the opportunity to write about Ghosh. Thank you once again for introducing me to Ghosh. And over to you, Shobha. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Namita ji, for that wonderful wrapping up of the whole issue of the relevance of Ghosh as a contemporary author, and so wonderfully explaining the thematic concerns. Thank you so much. Am I not glad? I mean, I've been I've been Indira ma'am's student since ages, but then am I not glad? I mean, to see you so much now, finally. So over to Monali. Monali, you have to welcome ma'am formally, and then we proceed further.
Thank you, Shubha. Thank you, Shubha. I'm so delighted to have ma'am back. So it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Indira Nityanandam, an outstanding scholar. She has been a gold medalist in her post-graduation from Osmania University. Her teaching career spans across almost 5 decades. After successfully serving her term as the principal of Srimati S.R. Mehta Arts College, Ahmedabad, she is now the director at Bharatiya Bhasha Sanskriti Sansthan, Gujarat Vidyapeeth, Ahmedabad. She has published widely with more than 50 research papers to her credit. Her numerous research papers and more than half a dozen edited volumes speak volumes about her as a versatile scholar and a keen researcher. Uh, Being an enthusiastic academician, she encourages young students and researchers towards scholarly pursuits and guides them with a parent like affection. It has been a very rewarding experience to have her as the editor of this anthology. I request her to share with us her journey and experience of putting this book together. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Okay, Manali wanted me to say something about how this book came together. So we began this book with another friend of mine who was also interested, but somewhere along the line, he dropped out of this project. So we were two of us who thought about this, went ahead. As you know how it is, you ask for papers, people respond, people ask for extra time. April, we began this, and gradually we started getting papers, started looking at the papers. Some papers had to be sent back because the documentation was required. We had to ensure that the same topic was not repeated. So we had to request friends to change their topic, etc., etc. One of our Ahmedabad friends, I don't know if he has joined us, is Father Sunil, whose paper was the first paper to come in, which came in April 2020. And I used to feel terribly guilty whenever I met him or came face to face, because for an entire year, his paper lay with us, but well, it is now in the volume. So put the book together, started working on the editing part of it. My very young friend, Medha Sharma, helped me a great deal in this process of editing, proofreading, doing all the, I won't call it dirty work, but all the difficult work, all the boring work, all the thankless work. Thank you very much, Medha. I publicly acknowledge the help that you've given. We were very particular that the documentation should be good. So I'm sorry if some of the contributors feel that we wrote to them too many times because we wanted it to be according to the MLA 7 strike sheet. We also wanted the abstract in a particular way, etc., etc. During all this process, I must acknowledge the patience with which our publisher, creative publishers, Mr. Tarachand, and I do not know if his daughter is here with us, Neha. Medha, has Neha joined? Neha, the publishers, Delhi-based creative books, they've been very, very good with their publishing. And those of you who have got the book, I hope the got the book, the others can get it from creative publishers. Very soon, you know, Delhi is going through a bad phase right now, lockdown and all that. So my publisher has not been able to work on the Amazon and the Flipkart front, but that will also happen very soon. So then you could order your books from there. You can get the books for your library, for your personal use, etc. So this volume, when I began itself, I had two things in my mind. One, I said, I do not want only well-acclaimed scholars to be contributing. Because whenever I meet a young research scholar, when I say young, I'm not talking only about age. I'm talking about somebody who has just entered the field and does not know who's going to publish his or her book. So I had decided right at the beginning that I'm going to encourage young scholars. So you will notice that. Number two, enough has been written about the Calcutta chromosome or about shadow lines or his earlier books. But a lot requires to be done about his later. Maybe beginning somewhere with the Glass Palace, maybe, or even later, or the Hungry Tide.
the trilogies that Namita talked to us in such detail and depth about. The trilogies, both the trilogies are really, really interesting. So I said we should encourage that. At the same time, I felt that you cannot appreciate Amitav Ghosh unless you know his concerns about the ecology, about the environment. And I would advise anyone who is interested, not advise, suggest, right? Anyone who is in that interested in the area to go and read The Hungry Tide, which would really make you want to make a trip to Sundarbans. Not that I've been, but many of us probably don't even know the dolphins that are there in the Sundarbans, right? You think you have to go to some, faraway seas to be, maybe to the Maldives if you want to see dolphins, but you can see the dolphins and what risk they are. And Ghosh has this fantastic ability of linking characters from one book to another. I'm sure Namita has talked about it since I missed most of her lecture. So these characters come back, they come alive in another book, and then he's able to do it so well. So I told myself, we are going to encourage writings on his non-fiction also. So when you see the book, my dear friends, you will notice that we have papers as much on his non-fiction writing as we have on his fiction. I would not say that the book is the ultimate, but the book is certainly a beginning. A beginning to people who want to maybe work on Ghosh. Maybe you want to know more about Ghosh, want to be encouraged to read Ghosh. I think for all of them, this book is in a way, a beginning. I would really like to place on record my deep sense of gratitude to the contributors. Contributors who are abroad have probably not yet received their copies. Contributors who are in India would have received their copies by now. Because of the pandemic situation and because of certain rules and regulations in different parts of the world, some of our courier services to some of the countries of the world have not yet begun, or they began and they have stopped again. So maybe some of you who are abroad, those contributors have not yet received their copy, but you'll surely receive your copy. Tarachand has always been very kind. He doesn't charge for the contributors, as some publishers do. They say at least 50% pay karna, vagera, vagera. Tarachand ji has never done that. So all of you will get your first contributor copy. I would also request you to place an order for your college, whatever institute you are connected to, in which case you will get the usual 10% discount. But if you place an order for yourself, you want to gift it to your friends or whatever, you will get a 30% what is called a contributors discount. So please feel free to buy the books, buy the book, gift the book, read the book, and enjoy the great writer. Thank you very much for coming here. The program is not over. The event continues.
Thank you so much, Manali. I'm more than a seasoned academician. I think I'm a seasoned theater artist, but take it that way. My journey with Ghosh also begins with Namita ji when we were trying to discuss her doctoral thesis together on various occasions. And that is the time when I first got introduced to Amitav Ghosh, could not keep myself away from him. And then one after the other, I have been borrowing all of the novels from Namita ji and reading them. But particularly the Glass Palace has occupied the maximum attention. And the paper which I have done, the article which I have done for this book is the portrayal of the other in conflict. Now, when I discuss the Glass Palace, one of the first things you see that comes to what I have also tried to portray in the article per se, that Ghosh has tried to dispel two very popular narratives, unfortunately, that have been making the rounds in the Indian subcontinent and in many other East Asian countries like Burma or Malaya. The first of these popular narratives is that a typical East Asian mindset believes that marginalization, oppression, and suppression came into India or Burma or Malaya, for instance, only after the European white supremacist races came in, particularly the British. That is the first popular narrative we are all very comfortable to think of, that before them, everything was, oh, great. But Ghosh dispels that narrative in the Glass Palace. The second popular narrative is again very peculiar to the Orient, as Namita ji has so correctly described it. A very peculiar narrative again is that we have a very, very rich old cultural heritage. We go back nearly 5,000 years, and therefore we have the highest amount of intellectual prowess, and we are this and we are that, and we are the best. We brought this, we give the zero, and we give the this way, then that way. So we are under the impression that the British came, the white races came, the French, the Portuguese came, and they destroyed it all. So Ghosh, in his own way, has been trying to tell us in the Glass Palace very subtly, very discreetly, that none of these two popular narratives hold ground. For instance, marginalization, oppression, suppression existed in Burma, in India, much before the European nations first came in to colonize. The marginalization, the suppression, and the oppression was happening in India thanks to the caste system, thanks to the monarchical system where the entire country was broken up into various kingdoms. Haven't we heard stories of monarchs being equally cruel and brutal? The two adjectives which we are more than ready to apply to the British and not to the old Rajas and the Maharajas very much ruling in India. The second popular narrative that we were the greatest and this and that, Ghosh is very nicely and very subtly dispelling that popular narrative by questioning the Sati Pratha, for instance, the no, a big no to the widow remarriage system, child marriage, encouragement to child marriages, the whole ghost, the entire ghost, the big ghost, ugly monster of gender discrimination, which has which raises its ugly head even today. So all these evils, Ghost very clearly tells us, existed in India even before the British came in. And the suppression, the cruelty, the brutality was always there. It was not that the British brought cruelty and brutality with them for the first time. That was not the case. Coming to the question of the other in the Glass Palace, Ghosh very nicely has asked a very adamant question, a very relevant question. Who is the other in this novel? Is it the British soldiers who have come to subjugate and take over India and Burma? Of course, the British did not come with any noble intentions. They came to loot, to plunder, to take away the raw materials, the teak, the rubber, the manpower, the slaves. They wanted to enslave, undoubtedly. Their intentions were very clear. But you see, when the British soldiers, the young lads, when they come to Burma to take away the teak, to take away the rubber, when they come to India and they start recruiting people, the Indian soldiers and officers in the British Army, they also know this very well. They understand and realize this very well, that their time is numbered. Till the time their military prowess reigns supreme, they will stay in India. The day the military prowess is overturned or thrown out, they will become the other in Burma or in India. The classic case of Uma and her husband, who is the collector. Uma is very much a Bengali, very much an Indian, married, has all the riches of the world, so to speak, and yet feels so alienated in her surroundings. In fact, once she loses her husband, has the money, travels across the seven seas, goes to New York in a small apartment, finally thinks that this is home for me. And yet, in the very next sentence, agrees that this is not really home. So she is the other. In every situation, she is the other. Take the case of Rajkumar, for instance. Rajkumar is the biggest, what shall I say, the tool, so to speak, for dispelling the popular narratives also, and for feeling alienated in every surrounding. His roots are Indian, but then he is brought up in Burma, and then finally he is not able to, you see, he befriends the British, he makes them, he starts suppressing the laborers from India. He starts using all the tools of oppression and suppression, and he furthers the marginalization process. His wife Dolly is what I call the other of the other. An orphan in Burma, she is at the age of 10 brought over by the Queen of Burma to look after the princesses, and then comes to India, follows the royal to entourage to India, comes to Ratnagiri, stays there for 2 decades. Now once she goes back to Burma, she doesn't even have a home. She feels the most unrooted, so to speak, because she can't go back to Burma because there's nobody waiting for her there. Look at Arjun, for instance. Look at the king of Burma. King of Burma again. If he cried that the British had stolen his ruby ring, how many ruby rings had he stolen already, he and his forefathers of the subjects of Burma? Did the king of Thibaw ever try to look into the troubles of his subjects? Did he try to spread education, technology, exposure? None of that. So the twin themes, so to speak, brought in by Amitav Ghosh in this glass palace stand very correct, because he clearly shows that the Oriental kings and rulers were subjugators and oppressors themselves, point number one. And point number two, every character shown in the glass palace, British, Burmese, or Indian, each one of them went through a long process of both external conflict and internal conflict. They felt the oppression of the white races, the British who came to India, and they felt the oppression within the layers of their own countries. So this is what I had to, was my take on the glass palace.
We are pleased to have amongst us Father Sunil Makwan. He is an assistant professor of English at St. Xavier's College, Ahmedabad. His paper describes the centrality of family in the fiction of Amitav Ghosh. Father Makwan, how does Ghosh promote a family-centered literary cosmopolitanism among post-colonial migrants in his novels?
Yeah, and that's what my article is about. So thank you for having me. Better late than never. I became a fan of Ghosh because of my mentor. My mentor at Marquette University in the US insisted that if I wanted to do my PhD on South Asian writers' cosmopolitanisms, Ghosh had to be there. And I only wanted Rushdie and Roy. And he said, you know, Ghosh has to be there. So I read all of Ghosh and I said, of course, Ghosh had to be there. And what I was arguing was that these South Asian writers, particularly Rushdie and Roy, have evolved South Asian varieties of cosmopolitanism. So of course, they promote a kind of universalism and a kind of going beyond your nation and your culture and becoming at ease everywhere. In fact, becoming at ease only in travel. But that is Rushdie, and that's the kind of ideal of a diasporic subject that he promotes in his novels, not only in The Ground Beneath Her Feet, but also in The Moor's Last Sigh and his later novels that have come out after he's settled in New York. So as opposed to that, I argued that Roy promotes a kind of an Indian cosmopolitanism, whereas Ghosh promotes a kind of a familial, family-centered cosmopolitanism, because for Ghosh, a diasporic subject is not an educated immigrant Indian who is more at ease in the cosmopolitan centers than in India, and who is not attached to either India or to his family as strongly as, let's say, the poor diasporic communities of the Girmitias, that is the landed, the bonded laborers are. So that got me more interested. My research question got me more interested in reading about Ghosh, and I started reading from the Circle of Reason. In fact, in an antique land, to all the way to his latest novel. In those days, it used to be The Flood of Fire. So I read all of those and I realized that Ghosh is continuously and persistently promoting that the Indian migrant subject is essentially poor, essentially rural, and family centered. And Ghosh says, I have quoted in my text extensively in his interviews, that the idea of the nation was destroyed by the colonialists. India as a nation did not exist, so people had nothing to hold on to. So the educated migrated to the urban centers, but the poor, they were forced to migrate, especially the Girmitias, as mentioned in the Ibis trilogy. And what had they to hold on to? They had familial ties, they had communitarian ties, they had the friends they made in the diaspora to hold on to. And the idea of a family evolved, for example, in the Ibis trilogy, on the Ibis itself, not only between Diti and Kalua, but the entire community of the Girmitias who were brought on that literal, I call it the literal, on the seas by circumstances, by a turn of fate. And I say that negates the idea of a nation and promotes the idea of a family, but not only a family that's rooted in India, but a family that is perforce become cosmopolitan, and a family of the migrants and a family of the subalterns. And you can see that in the circle of reason in the character of Zindi. When she's turned out from her family, she's so distraught. You can see it in the character of the glass palace, namely Rajkumar and Uma. After 100-year long novel going around the world, ends in a bedroom with Rajkumar and Uma sleeping with each other. Very, very domestic, but also very cosmopolitan because they had been all around the world. And then it is seen in Diti and Kalua and other characters of the Ibis trilogy. So therefore, I have argued that Ghosh supports the kind of non-Western, non-patriarchal, and not centralized and non-essential cosmopolitanism of, say, Sheldon Pollock, Carol Breckenridge, and Dipesh Chakrabarti and Homi Bhabha. And I've quoted some other scholars, all of whom have spoken about decentralizing and de-Westernizing cosmopolitanism. So to do that, Ghosh turns to family, and family of the migrants and family of the subalterns. And that's what I'm arguing and I'm expanding in my essay.
So my article is on Gun Island, and in his novel Gun Island, Amitav Ghosh has adeptly juxtaposed an ancient tale of Bengali folklore with the pressing concerns about the necessity to conserve our natural and cultural heritage. Ghosh voices his concern about the apocalyptic tendency of the fast disappearing mangroves of the Sundarbans, thereby exposes the hypocrisy and self centeredness of human nature. Throughout questions that the novel raises about various global crises and the uncanny futurities and epiphanies that impact lives. It's almost like a journey to self discovery simultaneously. Through a series of episodes from an ancient folklore, Ghosh pieces together some rare insights of the human mind with the current concerns of the disappearing lands, heritage, and communities through trafficking, slavery, or migration in this age of neoliberalism and capitalism, raising concerns about the apocalyptic proclivity of rapidly depleting uh, mangroves like the Sundarbans. He not only cringes at the murky recesses of the human nature through this novel, but also focuses on the grim trepidations that drives the researchers from all over the world to endeavor to conserve the home we all cohabit called Earth. This paper attempts to trace out the questions that the novel raises about various planetary crises, um, The paper also scrutinizes some of the inevitable concerns and anxieties about the conservation of our planet and preservation of human values that Ghosh brings out through this novel. It also attempts to undertake a humanist interpretation of an enormous wealth of perspectives from history, folklore, anthropology, and science as reflected in Gun Island that can threaten the survival of all living entities on this planet. Gun Island is an extension or a sequel to Ghosh's novel Hungry Tide, as Namita ma'am had rightly mentioned. Bordering on the pattern of a picarous novel, Ghosh unfolds the tale through the experiences of Dinanath Datta. He's also called Dean, and he's supposed to be the narrator. He's a pentagenarian antiquarian, a seller of rare books, and an earnest seeker of ethnographic interpretations, so mostly culture oriented interpretations. When the novel opens, he visits his hometown Kolkata from Brooklyn for some weeks, hoping to meet old acquaintances and his soulmate through the social gatherings that he has been attending. However, instead, he stumbles upon excuse me, upon a myth that he has vaguely been familiar with, which unleashes a gamut of ecological, migratory, anthropological, and sociological significances that prompt him to undertake the current occurrences of the day through adventurous travels and even self introspection. So um, this story or the legend has got to do with Mansa Devi, and I'm sure many of you are aware that even now in several regional and other TV channels, we do find a lot of mythological um, TV series that are aired and which are received with a lot of interest. This is exactly what Dean had also noticed when he had gone to Kolkata. So Dean's cousin Kanai Dutt, his aunt Nilima Bose, an erstwhile resident of Lusibari, which is supposed to be located in the Sundarbans, Pia, an Indian American marine biologist researching on dolphins, some residents of Lusibari like Moina and her son Tipu, an Americanized, dubious, delinquent teenage trafficker, Horain, the seasoned boatman, and Rafi, the teenage fisherman who ventures into from Sundarbans to Venice, braving the usual perils of illicit migrations along with Tipu, all lead Dinanath Datta to explore the veracity of the legend of the gun merchant, which is closely associated with Mansa Devi. So this gun merchant is also called the Banduki Sadagar, the Bengali name for it. And Gun Island is also discovered through this unique odyssey. Now, the protagonist of the novel, according to Amitav Ghosh, is Chinta. Her name is Giacinta Schiavon, and she's a professor of culture studies, who is a towering Italian researcher and academician and Dean's friend. Her uncanny interpretations of the central mythological story generate the riveting plot of the novel, renders a parallel to the legend, and even finds solutions of the issues of the narrator, including finding a companion for life. The calamitous disruptions of climactic anomalies, the peculiar strandings and migrations of dolphins, which we have also noticed sometime around August 2020 when so many, around almost 400 pilot whales had been found stranded on the coast of Australia. And this is exactly what is reflected in this novel, which was written in 2019. So it almost sounds like a prophetic novel uh, that is given to us because many of the natural disasters and calamities that are described in the novel are seen around us with very realistic precision. Uh, Now, while the calamitous disruptions of climatic anomalies and these particular strandings also show how human beings are quite helpless in the face of nature. So, this legend of the gun merchant, which is the central element of the novel, closely resembles a popular Bengali myth of Chand Sadagar, who refuses to yield to Mansa Devi, the deity of snakes. She pursues him with several hindrances until he surrenders and builds a temple for this goddess. Uh, this is the usual legend. Since all these characters speak to Dean um, of this merchant as the gun merchant, the scale becomes the pivotal idea of the plot of the novel. Nilima Bose, who wants her nephew Dean to visit the shrine Banduk Dham in the Sundarbans before it gets swept away by a cyclone or a flood, which indeed happens halfway through the novel. And through a chain of events, he visits the shrine, witnesses Tipu being bitten by a cobra in the temple, and is rescued by Rafi. Uh, Tipu recovers in the hospital, but Pia witnesses the unexpected beaching of three Irrawaddy dolphins, what Indra ma'am had been talking about just now, that are rare in in the territory. Now, these uncanny fortuities also emanate through the disappearances and appearances of certain species of the animal kingdom. While rare endangered pods of dolphin are rapidly depleting in number, causing researchers like Pia unbearable anguish and anxiety, the deadlier species like the black venomous yellow-bellied snakes in Los Angeles or the brown recluse spiders and shipworms are making frequent appearances in colder regions due to global warming. So through Gun Island, Ghosh demonstrates his genuine engagement with ecological crises of the day. Issues of global warming and climate change have long been contentious issues in the present day. Despite presenting his urge and clarion call for a global warming, climate change and deforestation through universal calamities like floods, cyclones, tornadoes, and forest fires, Ghosh also deplores his failure to tackle climate change in his own novels. There is something that I thought I should just mention. This is very interesting because Ghosh mentions in this novel through Chinta's long discourse that human beings are also so possessed by this habit of their own routine that they become oblivious of their responsibility to the world around them. And he Ghosh takes a step forward to such action by acquainting the reader to the subtle nuances of life around them. So, on a trip to an island in the Sundarbans, Piali, the field biologist, shows shows Dean that the river, which seemed at first to be an unwearing mud-colored uh, entity, revealed itself to be a composite of many uh, hues of different colors. Ghosh describes through Chinta's narration, and I'll just take a minute to quote from him. Quarantines and curfews were put into place. All who were suspected of infection were transported to a quarantined island, while the few who recovered were sent to yet another island. All public places were closed, and people were forbidden to leave their houses. Only soldiers could move about freely. The streets were so empty that ants began to sprout between the paving stones. Specially appointed marshals, whose faces were covered with beaked masks, would go from house to house, fumigating and checking for signs of the disease. I think anybody who has lived life in the last 1 year in this kind of a situation would be able to relate to it. So rather than the construction of the story, it is the set of issues uh, the story raises that lingers in the minds of the readers for long. These issues are extremely crucial in the present day scenario in the landscape of human life. Ghosh raises our concerns and sensitivity towards man made and natural creations. through the explicit descriptions of the Banduk Dham in the Sundarbans and edifices in Venice as monuments of cultural heritage, as well as visual feasts of the migration of birds, dolphins, and whales. Ghosh brings home the fact that every beautiful entity is worth conserving, and the messages of this novel are a sincere urge to act upon conserving the same. So this was about my paper. Thank you, Shubha ma'am. You can take over.
Thank you so much, Manali, for throwing light on that wonderful topic. And you are a true academician. You really have researched the article so wonderfully well. I am now, ma'am, Indra ma'am, with your permission and with the permission of everyone present here, I'm going to invite upon someone very special. She's perhaps the youngest participant amongst us for the day. This is my student. I mean, I have learned this from ma'am. When I got my PhD, she was, I thought, happier than I was. And I didn't really understand why. I mean, but then as a teacher, now I have begun to understand. So I am going to invite my very young student, Sophia Shahiwala. She is, Indra ma'am, for your information, she is the university topper and she is a voracious reader. Her presentation on the deconstruction theory just maybe a couple of weeks back was so amazing that I thought that she has educated me a little more on deconstruction. So I wanted to invite Sophia. Sophia is an ardent fan of Amitav Ghosh, and Sophia has read The Glass Palace, and she wants to speak. She will speak on her observations on the Glass Palace. So over to you, Sophia. You could please switch on your camera and could we just have a look at you and then let's see you.
Yeah, she has.
Audible and visible?
Yes.
Yeah, you are
are.
visible and audible.
And Indira ma'am, if you notice behind her is a beautiful bookshelf. She is very fond of constructing a library of her own.
Wow.
And she has got that bookshelf made out of her own money.
Lovely.
So
all the best. All the best.
Thank you. Yes,
welcome.
Sophia.
Welcome, Sophia, to the King's Treasuries. If you don't know what it is, ask Shubha ma'am to tell you later. The King's Treasuries. Go on. Yes, Sophia.
Thank you so much, Shubha ma'am. Thank you so much, Indira ma'am, for giving me this opportunity to speak on one of the greatest writers in India. I may not be a PhD scholar or a researcher on Amitav Ghosh. However, as a reader, I would like to talk about The Glass Palace and the observations which I found relevant on The Glass Palace written by Amitav Ghosh. Excuse me. So criticism, you see, till date has not appeared to have done more than briefly note the significant literary, historical, and cultural issues that were generated so beautifully in Amitav Ghosh's The Glass Palace. The novel not only points out, but it also deals with Burma and the impact of empire on the country. My grandma, being from Burma herself, made me pick up this book. However, the place's history, culture, and ethos made me read it again and again. Ghosh was a child of independent India, and he critically dissected the colonial inheritance in his post colonial work. The Glass Palace is tended to be read as a form, if not necessarily one dimensional, indictment of colonialism. Ghosh himself had said in 2005 in one of his interviews that no matter how hard Indians tried to be like British, they were never admitted into the elite club of white colonialists beyond a point. This left Indians with an immense sense of hurt. Sometimes I think we don't realize what it was like to live in a colonial society. The rulers controlled all access to knowledge. That is why India could not prosper despite of all of its talent. You see, in the novel, Burma appears as a space of interpretation of different cultural groups. It showcases characters in a pan-Asian process that precedes colonialism while interacting with it. The main characters of the novel are indeed people who do not belong anywhere. Rajkumar brings Dolly back to Burma from India, but the family ends up in Calcutta. Dinu re-encounters Alison on her Malay plantation. Colonialism basically seeks to homogenize the complex Asian realities, making Hindu and Muslim cadets alike eat English food, and in wartime, denying all the non whites the right to flee Malaya. But against this standardized pressure, the narrated lives of Ghosh's characters show the multilingual and the pluricultural signifiers of human interconnectedness. This act of placing by Amitav Ghosh epitomizes the Glass Palace, which locates its characters in a richly complex Asian reality that transcends narrow nationalism and achieves a rather mediation between the ancient heritage embodied in the ruins and the modernity. So, to conclude, what I want to say, at moments like this, Ghosh's remarkable novel gives life to Edward Said's anti particularist perception that no one today is purely one thing. Thank you so much.
Shubha, I have to respond before you respond. Sophia, that was much too short, much too short. I'm sure you could have told us much more about your reading of, and as you consider me your ma'am's ma'am, I must say very well done, very well done, Sophia. Shubha, over to you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I also have to interrupt Shubha. Very well discussed, Sophia. And I'm so happy, so encouraged that, the youngsters, as Shubha pointed out, the youngest amongst us, you have critically analyzed it so well. And just like to say one thing before we continue, as Shubha ma'am pointed out, she was talking about the monarchy. So, see, it's just that Queen Supalayat, before she was exiled, she had several of her relatives murdered before coming to the throne. Okay, so this is just what your ma'am had pointed out and just what you are trying to tell us. But the best part of Ghosh is that he has also inspired several research works. Like I'm sure you must have heard of The King in Exile by Sudha Shah. She wrote this novel after reading not the novel, sorry. She wrote this book after she read The Glass Palace and started research work on Thibaw. So I think I'm really, really, Shubha is of course proud of you, but I'm equally proud. Very well done, beta. Very well done.
Are we looking at future research scholar for her PhD? Can I see 2 guides already ready for it? Over to you, Shubha.
Certainly.
Moving forward, we will come to almost the last speaker before we take in the question and answers. What greater joy to a teacher than her students doing very well and becoming research scholars themselves in the process. Sophia was one of them. I take so much of pride and so much of joy and so much of affection also, because you see, ghar ka bacha hai types for me. But the pride and the joy, I guess, is very obvious on my face when I want to introduce Medha Sharma. Very well read, and her analysis is a very stoic analysis. She will neither side with one character nor lean towards the other. The kind of non-prejudice and non-bias that she'll remain as a scholar, as a critic which most of us are perhaps not able to. Her journey with this book has been more close than most of us. She has been helping ma'am all throughout. So now, Medha, I want to really invite you and all of us, we want to listen to your take on Ghosh's iconic novel, The Hungry Tide. Over to you, Medha.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, present with all of you. I won't be speaking that much because, frankly, I'm quite nervous. But let me just start. Okay. For everyone's kind information, the title of my paper is Man and the Ways of Nature, a critical analysis of Amitav Ghosh's The Hungry Tide. Now, according to what I have read, Ghosh is a writer extremely inspired and interested in ecological writing. This can be observed in his fiction as well as non-fiction works. The Hungry Tide is a novel about the Sundarbans and its people, people who live there as well as the ones just visiting. The story has entwined characters with nature to the level where we cannot differentiate between one and the other. My paper focuses on the relationship between man and nature as witnessed in the novel. We as human beings have always thought that we are somewhat above all the creatures and things in the world, to the extent that we sometimes or most of the times defy laws of nature, but only to bear the consequences of our vacuous ideas. Humans today live in concrete jungles. The closest that we are to nature is the few potted plants that we have in our homes or the trees that we pass by when we travel on road. The paper emphasizes Ghosh's idea of the ways man has conducted critical opprobrium through his actions. In various ways that man has suffered the consequences of his own actions. I have a small paragraph that I'd like to read out from my paper. Nirmal remembered the story of the Royal James and Mary, a royal ship making its way through the channels of the tide country. The ship suffered a misfortune and capsized after striking a sandbank. A shipwreck in the Caribbean or the Mediterranean Sea would prove to be treasure for the divers or explorers. However, in the tide country, the waves digested the great galleon within a few years. The remains of the ship would vanish in a few years. Another incident was the shipwreck caused by the storm of 1737, when more than 24 ships were sacrificed for the hungry tides of the tide country, and thus it was called the graveyard of old ships. Now, I would like to point out that man here has meddled with the laws of nature, and that's why it has suffered, or rather, he has suffered the consequences of his own actions. Thank you. Had a lovely evening, and now I would like to invite Dr. Shubha Nigam, ma'am, for the vote of thanks. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Medha. Thank you, everyone. I remember distinctly in the lockdown how Indra ma'am one fine day called me and said that I want you to write this article. The pandemic was just, raising its ugly head. We were all trying to grapple with things, but this came as such a lovely opportunity to join with her in this book writing process. So I think the first vote of, thank you has to be to you, Indra ma'am, for gathering us all together on one platform. It has been such a fruitful journey. The more you read Ghosh, the more we discover the Indianness inside, lying deep within each one of us. So many, many thanks to you, ma'am, for getting us all together. A big thank you to Medha for stitching the entire book together, for entire program together. My learned friend, Monali, we have been getting together and, planning and, chalking out the program and everything. Your support has been invaluable. Namita ji, you were as fantastic as we all expected you to be. The analysis that you have offered about Ghosh, I'm sure that many of us, many of my students might be taking home some of the points for their presentations, for their papers. Perhaps some of them have even got an inspiration to do some further research. A big thank you to all the friends. We began late by almost half an hour to 35 minutes because of the technical glitches. but the technical support team has been wonderful. Natiketa Jagtap, Vishwaroop Sharma. Vishwaroop, I remembered your name today. So Vishwaroop Sharma and of course Anushri Kalani. Their support has been immense for allowing us to have the Zoom platform for such a long time. Thank you so much. The biggest thank you to all our students, our friends, well-wishers. Thank you very much. There was a time, Indra ma'am, when we had nearly 46 participants. And a big thank you to all my brothers in. All of them, ma'am, they have joined us with so much of enthusiasm and have stayed till right now. Very special thanks to Sophia. So thank you to all my friends, to everyone who joined here. Thank you very much. We meet again, Indra ma'am, very soon with the new book launch.